Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Cram. I am today joined with actor Shaan Sharma. He is the author of the book Commercial Acting in LA, a session director's guide. Um, I want to mention before I dive into too much of this stuff, Shaan and I actually grew up in the same state, and we both, our paths used to cross back in the day when he lived in the Twin Cities, going to auditions and things like that. He's got a lot of really good tips and insight and some stories to share.
I mean, I think people think acting is a talent that you either have or you don't have. I don't know where we got that. I think maybe it's because when we were growing up in high school, there were people who just seemed to take to it a little bit easier than others. Like some people were, funny because that's how they, survive socially, or some people were particularly fearless, where they would just get up and try something, or they were able to just surrender to what they were feeling in the moment
Yeah.
and just go with it. And we look at that and we say, oh, that person's talented. And there is something to be said for the fact that some of us are born with or develop these advantages, these things that make it a little easier for us to do what we do. But all of us act.
Fellow working actor Shaan Sharma loves the craft and business of acting. He's been directing casting sessions for many of the top casting directors in Los Angeles for over 7 years. He's also an acting teacher offering regular scene study, on camera acting classes for film and TV, as well as commercial workshops. Yeah, here we go. You and I are not strangers. I do want people to I do want people to know, like back in the day when you lived in the Twin Cities, our paths would cross, which was very cool. And more recently as well. I mean, I think the last time we were on a Zoom chat together, we were chatting with some college students about SAG-AFTRA and the union stuff. So
Right.
it's good to see you again.
Great to see you.
Yeah. So I'm excited to talk with you about your book, Commercial Acting in LA.
Uh-huh.
And in addition to that, I'm excited just to chat with you in general. So, um, you cover a lot of ground in this, which
Which is
for
surprising because I tried to keep it as short as possible. I didn't want to make like an encyclopedia. So hopefully you can read through it in a few hours.
yeah, and I think you even say that in a few parts. Like, there's more to this. Like, here's some resources and go dig them up. Um, since you've I guess a question. So are you because I want to drop some names. Like I know currently that you're doing some work on that super popular TV show. So you're working and you're performing. Um I guess I'm curious, like what is your schedule like these days?
Well, I'm really fortunate these days to just be able to focus on the artistic endeavors. For
Mhm.
about 10 years, I worked in commercial casting primarily. I did a little bit of theatrical because some of the casting directors I worked with did both theatrical and commercial casting. And theatrical, of course, in Los Angeles means TV and film, not theater. And
Yeah.
so I did that until about 2017, 2018, when I joined the board of SAG-AFTRA, and then I stopped working in casting because I didn't want to work on any non-union casting projects. And most of the commercial work had gone non-union. So there just wasn't as much work, and I didn't want to do the non-union stuff. So, but luckily around that time, both my acting career as well as my studio that I have, an acting studio. And so between, acting
Woohoo.
and teaching, that was able to support me for the last 4 years.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you.
And you do mention in your book, actually, you talk about that very topic, which is your acting studio. So I'm glad to hear that that has grown. I think even since you've
Well, and I was spending, from 9 a.m. to sometimes 7 p.m. or even as late as 1 or 2 in the morning when I was working in casting. And people were wondering how somebody like me could have a vitamin D deficiency in Southern California. And it's because I was in a dark studio all day, every day. And so having that time back has been so wonderful because it's allowed me to volunteer more for our union, for example, but
Mhm.
also I never have to stress about, an audition because I can always make the time to prepare. I don't have to worry about getting a shift covered or trying to take a break in the middle of a casting day. And that always caused stress between me and the casting director I was working with because they hired me for a reason. They wanted me to be in the room working with the actors. So it feels really good to have complete command over my schedule now.
I love it. I
Yeah.
absolutely love it. Um, You bring up something that I think is really interesting as far as sort of mirroring the Twin Cities, which is, I mean, I've noticed a lot of commercials and things like that are much more non-union than union. Um, I'm curious to pick your brain, though. I know that it's been a little while since you've lived here in the Twin Cities,
Mhm.
but from your experience in casting and just your experience in general now, like, what are the main differences between some of the castings that you experience either right now or have worked on in LA versus the Twin Cities?
The thing I think in the Twin Cities, we were always working directly with the casting director. Like
Mhm.
when you go to Babs casting, you're working with Barbara. When you're going to
Yeah.
I know Kurt Ackerlund isn't doing it anymore, but back in the day, Ackerlund and Associates, you'd be working with Kurt. He'd be coming out and giving you the spiel and put you on tape, or JR casting, all those places. You're working with the casting director. In LA, it's the opposite. I mean, unless you're working with like a smaller time casting director who isn't as established or isn't as busy, you're always working with session directors. And those are people who the casting directors hire, which is the job that I had for 10 years, where we're the ones running the audition. So you're coming in and you're working with another actor, and they speak your language and they know exactly, how to help you get where you need to go. And the
Yeah.
quality and the consistency is great because, that's what my devoted focus is, as an actor, helping other actors get what we need on camera. So I think that's one big difference between, auditioning in a market like Los Angeles. They also have session directors in New York, and I'm sure there might be some scattered around the country, but it's primarily a job that exists in Los Angeles and New York, the bigger markets. So, that's one big difference.
Well, and I can echo that. And actually, I love that you mentioned Ackerland casting from way back in the day, because I actually was a casting assistant there. That was actually one of the first jobs that I had, and it's so interesting, this whole conversation, because I remember, yes, Kurt Ackerland, he was. I'm not going to say all the time because I have a little tiny story. There was a casting session that was happening, and Kurt wasn't able to actually be in it. I
Mhm.
was in it, and I was basically doing, I think, what you describe in your book. I was, but the market here was not familiar. Like, I remember there was this one specific, I'm not going to name her name, but there was an actress that came in and she's like, "Where's Kurt?" And I was like, "Well, Kurt's not here today, but I'm going to be running the session." I will never forget, and she still works here in town, and I see her sometimes, but she was so rude to me. Like,
Oh,
she was so rude. She was like, "Well, if Kurt's not," like, she literally almost broke something. Like, she was throwing these props around and she's like, "I can't believe Kurt's not here." And it was just one of those moments that I was mortified because I was really, this just out of high school. And I'm like, "Oh dear God, she hates me," and blah, blah, blah. But
well, she's very, lucky to have that expectation, because in Los Angeles, you can't expect that the casting director will be in the session with you. Everyone's just like, whatever, everyone's busy, everyone's doing a lot. So it is what it is.
yeah, 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 yeah. It sounds like because I know that you touch on it in here a little bit, and I know that the book isn't necessarily geared towards the theatrical piece, but this is something I wanted to mention to you, like, kudos. Um, I love how you touch on the differences between a theatrical casting and a commercial casting, and you dive in and explain them really, really well. I feel like I don't know. I just feel like it's a difference that, especially in some of these smaller markets, I feel like specifically in the Twin Cities, again, some people might hate on me for this, but there's a lot of theater actors, and I feel like they're not always even familiar with the commercial world, where it's like, "What are you doing?" And then they, get a theatrical audition for a movie, and it's like, this is so different than what you're doing in theater. Not that I actually think theater actors are amazing for film, but I appreciated that you touched on that, even though it's a commercial.
Well, you have to learn how
Audience.
to adapt your craft for different mediums. I mean, if we're going to be doing voiceover, we're going to approach it differently than if we're doing stage work, and that's going to be different than if we're doing on camera. It's going to be different if we're telling story through dance or through singing or through, performance capture. Or, I mean, so, it's, I think people need to learn that it's not about them. It's not like they're not skilled. It's just that extra step to learn how to adapt your craft to a different format, a different medium. And commercial and theatrical jobs and castings just are so different because they serve such different purposes. So people can feel really messed with when they come and audition for a commercial because they're getting a lot of direction on how they're supposed to do every little thing. Whereas when you go to a TV and film audition, you're going to get almost no direction because they want to really see your own interpretation and bring it to life. So that can catch a lot of people off guard when they come to Los Angeles, for example, especially having gone to some, prestigious conservatory or acting school. And then they come in and then we tell them what to do for a commercial. And you can see their eyes dim like, oh, this is just a numbers game. This isn't about what I'm going to do. And it's like, no. It's what you're going to do, but within these specific parameters, so it just, people need to have, the right kind of perspective. Like they need to know what they're walking into so their expectations are adjusted. And that way they won't be shocked by the differences.
And would you say that that's one of, I guess, is that the major difference between the two for you?
Yeah, but I think it's important to understand why that difference exists. And that's because, one part of the industry, the commercial side, is there to serve corporate America and marketing and advertising. And that's a very different set of employers. When we're on the TV and film side, we're auditioning for directors and writers and producers and, people who are like storytellers, they're artists. So they have more of an imagination. But when you're on the corporate side doing marketing and advertising, those people are not necessarily artists. And the final decision makers are usually like, vice presidents of marketing or senior executives or whatever. And so they need everything to be just so that they can see, oh, this is the story that the advertising agency sold us. These are the types of people we're going to cast. So it's very specific. This is exactly the action that they're going to be doing. And we even use more setups and props and things so that they don't have to use their imagination to think, oh, she's at the computer. Oh, he's on the phone. Like we will really set it up so that the corporate people can see apples to apples to apples to apples when they're making their selections. And that's why we have to control it so much, is to make sure that they're getting consistency in what they're paying for. But on the TV theatrical side, we totally respect. The directors and the writers and casting directors and all of them, they love seeing what we do with it. And if we're a professional, we will perhaps even bring in a better idea than they had in their own minds when they were, thinking about it. So that's the difference comes from, it's a completely different set of employers. Just think of it that way. They share acting, but it's a completely different industry.
Yeah, I love that. It's a really, for some reason, I never have thought about that when I'm auditioning, but hearing you say it, I'm like, duh. Like, when I go in and audition for movies and films, which for me is more what I'm auditioning for than commercials, they aren't giving me props for the movies. They're like, yeah, you don't have to hold that prop. Just, it's interesting that you say that, because now that I think back on it, I'm like, yeah, that's interesting.
It's a fine line, because when you're auditioning for TV theatrical, and now that we're doing so much remote and via self-tape, like you don't want to cross the line into being like too desperate and needy, where it feels like you're putting more thought into your wardrobe, how you're setting up your shot, and like all the different props and all of that, and making that more important than the actual storytelling and your choices and your performance. So we're always in the TV theatrical side trying to make sure you should feel free to use actual props and things, but not to the point. Like I was helping a friend with the self-tape a few years ago, and she had converted her living room into what looked like a ship and like a pirate ship. And she rented like a pirate's costume, and she did pirate makeup, and she had like candelabra and all this stuff. And I'm like, it's like you're trying to shoot the show here. It's like you're trying to actually shoot. And I'm like, I think that's going to come off a little too much. Like you're trying too hard.
Well, yeah. And I would add to that too, like it almost isn't, what if she's wrong in her interpretation of what they're going for? Like look wise, I don't know. That's, it makes me think of something, and I'm forgetting the name of the actress, but most people know the show, the Andy Griffith Show, that old TV show. The actress that played Aunt Bee, she said when she was first auditioning for that, like she kind of had an idea of what she was doing for the character, but she's like, I wore it like a oversized sweater. Like I could move around in it. I wasn't so, I don't know. It's something I think about a lot when I'm auditioning, is I'm like, oh, I need to be a little flexible in this.
Yeah, I think just the most important thing is to tell the best story that you can. And the rest, especially on the TV theatrical side, there's a lot of forgiveness. If you go watch a lot of like, self tapes or audition tapes on YouTube of different, iconic movies and TV shows, you'll see that there's a lot of forgiveness in the in the taping quality. But now that we're all moving on to self tape and remote auditions, for the most part, I have an in-person audition today, which is rare. But now that we're doing that, I think the standard is rising of what people expect in terms of at least making sure you've got a nice clean backdrop that we can see and hear you clearly. You're not shooting it, like in a really dark, dim place or in some strange location or something. So the quality expectations are rising a little bit, but we also need to make sure we don't let the quality expectation rise to the point where we all have to have a full production studio in our apartment, which I pretty much do. But I have a studio, so that's different.
Yeah. No, I hear that. And I think I'm just having I'm having a flashback to a recent audition I had that was the callback was on virtual like this. And literally I just laugh because the director, like I had a friend reading with me and the director talked like way more to the reader than me. Like, and I was like, this is surreal. This feels weird. So yeah, it's interesting. Something I wanted to dive into with you, Shaan, because I'm personally curious to know a little bit more, but you mentioned in here, you touch on scams.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you yourself, it sounds like, got scammed in the Twin Cities. And it sounds like you were involved a little bit in exposing that somewhat. And can you tell me a little bit more? Because you mentioned in the book and you did a good job of like distilling everything down, but can you expound on that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, when I graduated high school and I went to Wayzata High School in Plymouth, I had done 9 plays in high school. So I was all excited to do acting after high school in the Twin Cities. Back then in 1998, the internet wasn't as much of a thing yet. So you still had to look in the paper, the 550s in the Star Tribune, the Performing Arts and Audition section. And in there, I ran across an ad for like, looking for actors and models and, come be discovered and all of that. And as an 18-year-old kid, you don't know any better. You're like, oh, this is where I look for opportunities. It's in the paper, it must be legit. And so, I answered that, and there was a place called John Casablancas that was in St. Paul, Bandana Square. And I remember they also had a talent agency called MTM that was like partnered with it. And, they talked me into signing up for a $5,000 program with pictures and going to New York and to try to get representation in New York. And I didn't know
that's expensive by today's standards in my world. Like that's a lot of money.
Well, and it gets worse because I spent all summer paying for it. Instead of spending time with my friends before they went off to college, I was off working two jobs just to pay for this program. And when we all went to New York, there were about 20 of us. The way they treated us, the way that we ended up being taken to all these like open call days where we could have gone there ourselves without them if we had for a fraction of the price. The quality of the photography and the training we got was terrible. And so when we got back, almost all of us were outraged about like what we had participated in, but nobody really knew what to do about it. I didn't even really know what to do about it, but it just never left me. And then over the years after that, I did actually get into the professional side of the industry and started getting representation. I figured out how you shoot like actual headshots as opposed to these modeling shots. And I learned that there are these kind of modeling and acting schools, quote unquote, like John Casablancas, Barbizon, John Robert Powers, Karen International. There's a bunch of them, but they tend to prey on people's dreams of wanting to be discovered. They think that, that's how it works. So they're open to being exploited like that. They pit children against their parents because they say the kid, you can be a star, and the parent, you should really believe in your kid. The kid tells your parent, like, if you won't pay for this, it means you don't believe in me. I mean, it's really sad what I've seen, where that dynamic where they just bilk thousands of dollars out of children and their parents who don't know any better. And so I started helping this guy in St. Paul produce fashion shows in like 2001. And we did a couple of shows at First Avenue. For those who don't know First Ave, it's like the club where Prince shot Purple Rain, but it's like downtown Minneapolis. And after helping him for a couple of years, I had already been producing music shows myself as a musician. So I thought I'll produce a fashion show, but use it as an excuse to educate the community, get press, and also bring everybody together to learn and to create something great. And we did 4 of those shows from 2003, 4, 5, and 6. And it got bigger and better every year. And we got tons of press on the issue. And it actually even opened up an investigation into John Casablancas. They got kicked out of the state of Minnesota. They tried to re-establish themselves as something called like Robertson Taylor, some other weird like name, and they got shut down again. And it actually got exposed that they were stealing money from their clients because the modeling agency, the MTM agency, they were actually taking money they should have paid to the talent and using it to buy fancy clothes and go on trips and all these things. So they really crossed a lot of bad lines. But ultimately, the point of everything we were doing with these shows and with my working with the press was just to say, you don't have to spend a lot of money to get into this industry. Those types of schools are preying on people's dreams. They're not being honest. You're not getting good quality photos and training. And so the goal was to shift people towards the legitimate side of the industry. And so I did that until I left Minnesota in 2007.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I appreciate you even sharing that much information and depth. Especially now, I'm actually, I just heard on the radio an ad. It wasn't John Casa. I don't even remember the name of what it was, but I was like, ding, ding, ding. It's some like, we're going to be discovered, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how agents work. Agents don't post a radio ad telling you that you're going to be in the next, Martin Scorsese movie. That's not how the industry.
Well, and they don't ask you for money. If someone's a legitimate agent, they're not going to ask you for money to represent you. I mean, a caveat to that is just, some agencies I know, especially in smaller markets, tend to charge, their talent once they sign you just for the admin fee to put you up on their website and to get you all set up and that kind of stuff. But it's very different than asking for thousands of dollars to teach you, especially if you're not a model type, then you don't need runway classes. That's probably a big sign, that you're in the wrong place. And so, but it's filler. It's something that they can charge for. So anyway, that it was really important to me to try to create a safe haven and the right information about how to get into the industry safely. And it was one way that I distinguished myself in the Twin Cities before I left is people knew who I was because I was fighting back.
Well, and I applaud your, and I so appreciate, I mean, even your book, like, offering feedback and education. I think that's a big thing. Like I do see a lot of message boards and I run into a fair amount of people. They're like, I want to be an actor. I want to be a model, whatever. And I'm like, well, then read a book. There's so many out there, like, and people, they like cringe. They're like, oh my God. And I'm like, then go watch a YouTube. Like, it's not that hard in the age we live in to educate yourself a little bit about this industry. It's frustrating to me actually, because I even one of my friend's brothers, he's like, you can get me in a movie, right? And I'm like, no, actually I can't. Like, do you know what it's like to working on a film? And I know that you know this, it can be really grueling. And if you don't have some of the know-how and knowing what in the heck is happening, no.
But if you think about it, like our high school drama teachers didn't know what it's like to work in professional film and television. And a lot of like college drama professors maybe have never worked in professional film and television. So it's a lot of the blind leading the blind out there. And it's hard for people to find the right information. So it's just important for us to continue to put out resources and try to, I mean, it's tough now because online, even when you Google stuff, there's no telling you're going to land on something legit. You might actually land on something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where I appreciate when people have taken the time to put together a book, because I'm like, well, that took a little bit of thought. But yeah, I agree with you. And asking around and getting references and things like that is really good. I do have a non like actory, it's kind of actory, but like, let's say that somebody, not that somebody wants to get into acting, but what if they wanted to get into casting? What would you recommend for someone that's interested in like, maybe if they were wanting to pursue a career in casting, do you have any like a little tidbit or something you could say for them?
Oh, sure. I mean, so it depends on how you want to get involved in casting because there's a lot of roles in the casting world that don't have to do with being the casting director. I mean, the casting director is ultimately the one who's responsible for bringing options to their client, whether it's a corporate client for commercials, whether it's a TV, theatrical, theater, something like a creative client. So if you want to actually be a casting director, well, there are so many these online casting platforms where you can, ask for access to have a casting director account and suddenly, go out and try to find clients like, go to production companies, go find directors, or if on the TV theatrical side, going to producers and production companies, directors, and you just basically make yourself available. But being a successful casting director, you really have to love people. You have to be patient. You have to have a vision for if you get a script or a piece that you know how to bring the right options to your client, either what they're looking for or what they never knew they needed. If you're just starting out and you want to get into casting and you're not necessarily ready to leap into being a casting director, then contact casting directors and basically say, I'll read for you, I'll help in the office, I'll do any of this grunt work. It may or may not be paid. It just depends. Like on the TV theatrical side in Los Angeles anyway, these casting offices always need readers so that the casting director can just watch and they let a reader read with the performer. And that is usually an unpaid position because, you're just there to help and to build the relationships and that kind of thing. On the commercial side, they, obviously I got paid quite well to do what I did working as a session director. It's not easy to be a session director because you have to be very efficient. You have to be good with technology. You have to know how to direct actors. But it was a really great job. And it's something where you have to kind of apprentice for a few weeks before you're like ready to take over and actually do a session. But I mean, the short answer is just if it's something you're interested in doing, read about it, learn about it, go to the CSA's website, which is the Casting Society of America, go to the CCDA's website, that's the Commercial Casting Directors Association, and then contact casting directors.
Yeah. It's all really good, good advice and info. And that's something I love about you, Shaan, and it just shines through is that you're like a teacher, you're an educator, you're, and you care. It's nice. I do have another question for you. What's a common myth? I wrote this one down. What's a common myth about the industry, or your job, that you'd like to debunk?
Oh, for sure.
And that can be acting or you know what I mean? Take your pick.
Oh, I think the biggest myth is that it's a talent. I mean, I think people think acting is a talent that you either have or you don't have. I don't know where we got that. I think maybe it's because when we were growing up in high school, there were people who just seemed to take to it a little bit easier than others. Like some people were, funny because they, that's how they, survive socially, or some people were particularly like fearless where they would just get up and try something, or they were able to just, surrender to what they were feeling in the moment and just go with it. And we look at that and we say, oh, that person's talented. And there is something to be said for the fact that some of us are born with or develop these advantages, these things that make it a little easier for us to do what we do. But all of us act. Every human being, if you're not acting exactly how you're feeling in the moment, you're acting. If you're trying to get along in a meeting without, strangling your boss, then you're acting. If you're trying to bite your tongue when somebody, so we're always used to acting, but we're used to acting in our own life stories. So it's not like acting. But when you're actually trying to bring your, another story to life with the same kind of nuance and specificity and fullness and all of that, that's where it's a skill. It's just a skill. Yeah. And so I would say 95% of your ability as a performer is your skill. And about 5% I would leave up to just like, oh, I happen to be just have one of these natural advantages or these socially developed advantages or physical advantages. And so that I think is the biggest myth, is that anybody can act. If you really have a sincere desire to learn, just about anybody can act. And so to me, it's not a talent or something you have or don't have. You can teach anybody how to do it.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. As one who has often heard, you're good at acting. It's like, yeah, it's taken a while, but
right. But I think that's the other myth, is that you can just do it. It's a skill. Now, there are certain roles that you can jump into where you're basically just being yourself. And as long as you're not too weirded out by the camera, you can survive. And I think all of us have booked a job where we're like, I booked this by accident because I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm just here making, like, some of the early commercials back in Minnesota, like when I got my first Best Buy like commercial, like I was not a skilled trained actor. I just was in the right place at the right time, and boom, there's 15 grand in a national commercial. So it's not like, I think people get confused because it's not like every role we do, you have to be a really skilled actor to pull off. But in order to make it a career, if you actually want this to be a career, something that you thrive at, then you absolutely need to learn how to do it. And people spend way too much time trying to succeed being an actor than trying to be a really skilled performer.
It's resonating for me, Shaan. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
There's I do want to be cognizant and aware of time too. But
I'm good, brother. As much time as you need.
Good. Awesome. No, I'm having some flashbacks to the latest film that I had worked on, and we shot like overnight. And I was a fairly I always get cast in really roles I think are really super fun. Meaning like very like you have to dig deep emotionally and just dark or crazy funny, or you know what I mean? And we had to stay up overnight, and like we were doing some technical things really early in the morning. And I did have the thought, because I was like, I am so tired. And it's relying on some of those things. Well, how do I survive this and still tap into, using some of the skill sets and tools that I've learned over the years. But I did kept thinking of like my brother's friend who he was like, just throw me in a movie. And I'm like, I don't think you would be able to do this right now in this moment when everybody's dog tired, but you still have to deliver. And how do you do that? And like, some of those skill set things. Have you experienced? I'm sure you have. I mean, you've worked a long time. Does anything jump in your head where some of the skill sets and tools that you've had to develop and learn have come in really super handy?
Oh, of course. I mean, because, one of the things that can happen if you're not careful is, not doing a performance that can cut together in post. And so it's really important for us to be able to keep the energy up, especially when you're doing, a day where you're shooting a scene and there's going to be multiple setups. So they're going to have the camera over here, then the camera over there, then the camera over here. And you've got to make sure that your performance is consistent enough that they can cut pieces of that all together in the editing process. And so that means making sure that you're really prepared, making sure that you're clear on your choices. In some cases, making sure that your blocking is set so that you don't make it impossible because you're on the other side of the room when you should already be on the other side of the room. So there's things like that where, you have to be able to follow kind of a routine without it becoming routine, where every time you do it, it's like a fresh new experience. And otherwise, in the movie Groundhog Day, Bill Murray reliving the same day over and over again. But at a certain point, he was so over it, he was trying to kill himself. Right? He kept trying to come up with creative ways to kill himself, and even that wouldn't end it. So that's not what we want as actors, is to live the same thing over and over and over again. That's like Groundhog Day. What we want is a new experience, a new discovery every single time. And that can be tough when you've done 10, 20, 30, 40 takes of something. So absolutely, we have to rely on our training to make sure it is fresh, it's consistent, it's full, it's present. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
It's fantastic.
Especially in some circumstances, which I'm sure you've experienced all too well, is like when you talk about it not being glamorous sometimes, doing what we do and it being a real slog, like, people get hurt, people get sick. It's sometimes what you're doing, you're freezing cold, or you're way too hot, or you're whatever. So it's not exactly like pampered work.
It's definitely not. Yeah. And I'm laughing so hard because, another recent film had me laying on like frozen cement for an hour. And I remember laying there, and my dad was able to come on set that day. And I'm sure you have stories like this too. Hopefully, I hope. I do play a lot of characters that are very beaten up, like in life and in general. So that I'm sure plays into it. But yeah, laying on cold cement floor for a couple of hours and having to maintain that energy is not glamorous.
Right.
Yeah.
And to not have your teeth chatter when you're supposed to be acting, or, we were doing, when we were shooting in, was it in Utah that for The Chosen, the show that I'm on, There was a scene where our breath was showing too much, so they had us chewing on ice cubes in between in between takes to like make our mouths even cold so that it wouldn't cause our breath to be seen, which was a good trick but also very cold.
Yeah, I was like, when it's that cold outside that you can see your breath, do you want to chew on ice? Like
exactly. No, obviously people have much more physically intense, demanding jobs than that.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm just saying, if people think that acting is all just comfort and rainbows and butterflies, that's not the case.
No, not the case at all. Completely random question for you. I see behind you. Is that Cupman from?
It is Cupman.
Yeah.
Cuphead.
Yeah.
Yeah. A buddy of mine got it for me because we spent a whole night playing that game. So it was his Christmas gift for me, I don't know, a couple of years ago.
It's adorable. It's a game. It's a game I've always wanted to play. I haven't played it yet. So that's why I was like,
hard, but so beautiful.
Cuphead.
Yeah.
Yeah, just totally beautiful. So I can talk and talk and talk. I know that you can too, because we can keep going, but I want to wrap this up. And who knows, Shaan, maybe I feel like we'll probably chat again at some point in time. But before I kind of totally close this down, I have 3, I'm calling them like lightning round questions. So
sure.
I'm gonna ask you a question and you just tell me whatever you kind of the first thing you think.
Sure.
You ready? Drum roll. Weirdest thing you've ever eaten?
I guess if I have to answer fast, I treated myself and my girlfriend to an $800 sushi kind of private meal. And It was a lot of the stuff that we were fed was stuff I probably wouldn't eat again. And it was all covered in truffle. It was all truffle, everything. And then weird stuff. It was like, it's one of those like 25 course sushi, special fancy schmancy, like once in a lifetime meals.
Yeah.
And it was, I would have way rather had like, store-bought sushi at your local grocery store.
I love that. Question number 2. What would be your weapon of choice in the zombie apocalypse? Blah, I can't talk.
I would say definitely a shotgun, but with like unlimited ammo or semi-automatic shotgun or something with where you got plenty of rounds in the shotgun. Plenty of like a barrel fed shotgun.
That's fantastic. What fictional character do you think you are most like?
Oh, geez. What fictional character? Gosh, I'm not going to be able to think of that because it's just so many. I'm just trying to think of like my favorite movies. So, geez.
Or I could. Oh, there you go. I actually could see it. I could totally see it. We just need to add some glasses.
just a little nerdy, dorky, but stronger than they look.
Yeah. No, that is really great. I appreciate it, Shaan. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of go over some stuff with me.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for being interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that you would like people to know before I let you go?
If anybody's watching in Minnesota, I would love to just say that, I miss my home state and I miss Lianchin and Big Bull so much that I even flew my girlfriend and I to Minnesota for just a weekend last November just to eat Big Bull and Lianchin, and found out Lianchin was out of oyster wings because of the pandemic. There was like a chicken wing shortage. So I flew all that way to not even get my oyster wings, but it was fine.
It's still happening. I was at Lianchin the other day, and I was like, oyster wings, and they're like, not yet. Nope.
At least they had the Peking chicken and the strawberry lemonade and stuff. So, but just to anybody who's interested in the arts or in performance, just, there's a beautiful speech that Jim Carrey gave at a commencement speech for Maharishi University. If you just look up Jim Carrey Maharishi University speech, you'll find it on YouTube. But he says, he tells this beautiful story about his dad. And then he says, I learned a lot of things from my father, not least of which was you can fail at what you don't want. So you might as well take a chance on doing what you love. And if you watch it, it'll put it more in context. But I just encourage anybody here who is not doing what they're passionate about to do it.
Shaan, really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you. If anyone wants to know more about Shaan Sharma, you can go to his website, which is www.shaansharma.com. And Shaan Sharma, it's spelled Shaan, Sharma, Sharma. So shaansharma.com. If you want to know more about me, you can go to my website, which is iampaulcram.com. I really appreciate everybody listening and joining in the conversation. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.